Maul Lord, the newest project from the Lucasfilm animation team, finished airing its first season earlier this month, and I gotta say guys, it was better than I expected. I know that I am on record having expressed my extreme concerns for the show prior to its release, and I think that's for ample good reason. I am not a fan of most of Filoni's work outside of a couple of things, and more often than not, much more often than not in fact, I think the stuff that he produces generally turns out pretty bad. I am by no means one of these people that genuinely thinks that Dave Filoni is the savior of Star Wars or anything like that, as I've seen some people dub him. But you know what? I'm a man, and I have the balls to admit when my concerns might have been proven to be wrong, and I actually enjoyed something. And I did. I enjoyed Maul Lord for what it was. Now, this is by no means a great show. While there are certainly a lot of positives to be found, there are a multitude of things that I didn't think were well executed as well. But considering the amount of underwhelming/bad projects that Dave Filoni has pumped out in the last decade, as well as just the vast majority of all Star Wars projects under Disney being terrible, it is just that much sweeter when a pretty competently well done Star Wars show is released. Because contrary to what some may believe, I actually enjoy and prefer it when Star Wars is good. Yeah, I know, shocker. I prefer it when the IP I've dedicated so much of my life to consuming is at least decently written. My overall opinions on Maul Lord are pretty mixed. I know that's not the most interesting take by any means, because when you're in the era where so many people automatically lump stuff in either the "oh my god, this was peak" category, or conversely, "this was absolute dog shit" category, having a more nuanced set of opinions isn't the most trendy, because people naturally like to gravitate more to the extremes, but I always set out to try and express my opinions in the most honest and unbiased way possible to the best of my ability. When something is good, I will praise it. When something is bad, I will critique it. And for as many things in Maul Lord that I think there are to praise, there's just as many things that I wasn't too fond of. So the way I think I'm going to structure this video is in two distinct parts. Instead of being all over the place and constantly going back and forth between the things I liked and didn't like, the first half of this video will be dedicated to the things I think the show gets right. And for the second half of the video, I'll move on to the things that I took issue with. So if you want to just start here and watch the whole video through to the end, that would be awesome. But if you're just more interested in hearing me talk about the positives of the show or the negatives of the show, the timestamps are down below in the timeline for your convenience. But anyways, with all that preliminary stuff out of the way, let's just get straight into it. Part 1. The Good. The thing I think Maul Lord does the best is giving us a set of characters that are pretty well written, and subsequently makes us invested in them. To start off, I was pretty skeptical of our two new Jedi characters going into the season, because I wasn't looking forward to getting introduced to even more Jedi that survived Order 66. It's a common story trope that keeps getting done over and over again as of recently. That's a common complaint that a lot of people have been bringing up, I'd say, in the past 5 years or so. Because the more Jedi you begin to introduce that happen to survive Order 66, it begins to diminish the emotional weight that the Order 66 scene had in Revenge of the Sith. But this is a complaint that I started to become somewhat more lenient on in the past couple years or so, after doing some of the math in my head. So during Revenge of the Sith, there were about 10,000 Jedi Knights scattered throughout the galaxy. So even if Order 66 was, say, 95% effective when it was initially commanded by Sidious, that still leaves about 500 Jedi roaming around the galaxy. So I think the more important thing to worry about is, as long as Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Luke are the only 3 Jedi left by the time the original trilogy comes around, I don't think I have too much of an issue if there happen to be some Jedi left roaming around before then. And the same goes for Return of the Jedi. As long as Luke Skywalker is quite literally the last remaining Jedi in that film, the last remaining hope for the galaxy, I don't have much of an issue.
When gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be?
And this wasn't even a contentious issue until Dave decided that Ahsoka was just going to be fucking around somewhere, someplace in the galaxy during the time of the OT, but that's a little besides the point. So even though I was skeptical, I was still willing to give these two a chance, see what the writers did with them, and by the season's end, I can confidently say that I think the writers did a good job at giving us a set of Jedi that felt very compelling as individuals, that have a positive impact on the story being told here. In particular, there's this very interesting dynamic between between Maul, Devon, and Daki. It's like a triangle, you could say, or a rope in a tug of war, where Devon is the flag in the middle, and Maul and Daki are both trying to pull her to their side. On one end, you have Maul, who is trying to pull her towards the dark side, as not only is he actively looking for a new apprentice in this post-Clone Wars, pre-Star Wars Rebels part of the timeline, but also sees a lot of potential in her specifically. And on the other end, you have Devon's current master, Jedi Master Daki, who is trying to keep her grounded in the light side of the Force, in wake of all the different threats that are closing in all around them. In this triangular character struggle is able to get a lot of time dedicated to it due to how the narrative unfolds. Maul, Devon, Daki, as well as the others in the group, are forced to help each other on many occasions as they try to escape the grasp of the Empire, and so they end up spending a lot of time together. Maul throughout the season is constantly placing seeds of doubt inside Devon's head in the hopes that they'll begin to flourish, and she'll begin to embrace the dark side. And to Maul's credit, he's giving her a lot of persuasive arguments. The Jedi say that they are the protectors of peace and justice throughout the galaxy, but now they can't even use their powers for good without all the forces of the galaxy actively trying to hunt them down and kill them. And what kind of a life is that? Being forced to suppress your gifts? Barely being able to get by, begging for scraps, always hiding and on the run. In order to survive in these treacherous times, Devon must adapt, and Maul is willing to guide her down an alternative path. And throughout the show, you can tell that these are questions that Devon is genuinely considering. She's very questionable with her master about whether the life that they're leading right now is all that they're destined for. Always running, always hiding, and suppressing their abilities. From a certain point of view, the light side has failed them. Their pursuit of the light wasn't able to protect them against the grand plan of the Sith. Their passive ideology ultimately led them to losing control, as the forces of evil ultimately stole that power from them, from under their noses. But on the contrary, Daki is always there to give wisdom and steer her away from the forces that might lead her down a dark path. Daki realizes that Maul's words are poison, that he only seeks to use Devon and her abilities for his own self-gain. Sure, they might be in very dark times, but they must remember, at the end of the day, they are Jedi. They are meant to be selfless individuals. The gifts and powers that they possess aren't meant to be used so that others respect them. Their powers as Jedi are only meant to be used in the service of others. But even though Devon seems to accept all of Daki's words and advice in the moment, she always seems to come back to flirting with the ideas that Maul is presenting to her. Like I said, Maul has planted the seeds, and now it's just a matter of whether they bloom or not. Although in the beginning, Devon was very apprehensive towards Maul, as the season progresses, Devon starts to tolerate his presence more and more, and sees him less as an enemy and more so as a wild card of an ally. The final straw towards her accepting what he has to offer her comes when her master is struck down by Darth Vader. In the end, for all of Master Daki's wisdom and commitment towards the light side of the Force, it couldn't save him. And the imagery here really acts as a metaphor for everything Maul has been trying to get through to her. If you stay as you are, remain as a Jedi, believing all the things that you believe, and abiding by the principles that you've lived by, then you're gonna die. Just like him. And if you want to survive, you must adapt to the times. And ultimately, Devon chooses the latter. So all in all, it was a very compelling dynamic between the three of them, and I'll be interested going forward to see where they take Devon's character. Another group of characters that I enjoyed way more than I thought I was going to were the Lawson characters. In particular, Brander I found to be really compelling. Riley doesn't really come into focus until later on, and even then, it's more so for the purpose of supporting Brander's character journey, but Brander is the clear standout as the biggest surprise hit of the show for me. You know, going into it, when I got the sense that Brander was going to be the cop character, trying to hunt down Maul and snuff out his syndicate, I thought there was a major possibility that he was going to fall flat, be uninteresting, and a nothing of a character that only served as a tool to move the plot along, and would take a lot of time away from Maul and what I thought would be the more interesting parts of the narrative. But to my surprise, Brander ends up being one of the best characters of the show. There were so many times throughout, especially towards the beginning before the Empire showed up, where I was actually waiting for the show to cut back to his storyline, because I was more invested in what was happening with him than what was happening with Maul or the Jedi characters. I think Brander and his his subsequent journey as a character I found so compelling because they do such a good job of making him feel like the normal person that has gotten trapped in the mythic underworld surrounding him. Brander is the grounded, more normal guy who's easy for us the audience to identify with, in a world where he's surrounded by mythic warriors, criminal empires, galactic empires, all closing in around him. He starts out as just a normal cop, a captain in the Janix police dealing with his own personal issues. His wife and him got divorced, and although it's never specifically stated, I get the sense that it was somewhat recent, like in the past couple years or so, as well as he has a strained relationship with his son. The two are very distant, and you get the sense that Brander engrosses himself in his work to try and keep those more difficult personal issues on the back burner. And it all gets worse for him as things on Janix start to get more and more out of control. As Brander and the Janix police get involved in things that are way out of their depth to deal with by themselves, Brander's whole world starts to collapse around him. When the Empire shows up to deal with the situation, it becomes abundantly clear to him that the Empire only cares about control above all other things, as he sees his world being held hostage. He becomes more and more distrustful of the Empire in a very short period of time, and questions their motives, even though the Janix police that he serves for is ultimately under the larger jurisdiction of the Empire. And when he gets into a situation where the Jedi take refuge at his house and the Empire sends Inquisitors to hunt them down, Brander must choose a side. He ultimately chooses to go with the Jedi, but it isn't a sudden heroic turn. It more so feels like a spur-of-the-moment decision that was the result of several pressures building up across the season. And from there, Brander has to straddle this uncomfortable middle line. He's certainly not a villain. His decision to go against the Empire was just proof of that, but I wouldn't say he's this morally pure hero either. Him joining the Jedi feels less about finally, quote-unquote, joining the good guys, but more so about opposing the machine that is the Empire and to escape this planet with his son. Brander says that he never wanted to put Riley in this situation, but the things that he was focused on finally caught up to him, and it has unraveled his world. But the ironic part is, the two being on the run, being in the worst situation they've ever been in, is actually the thing that brings Brander closer with his son than anything ever has. It's a touching moment that makes you think that everything might just work out for them in the end. But of course, in typical dramatic fashion, them being able to escape together after this rekindling of their relationship would be too good to be true. When the Empire closes in all around them, and the group isn't able to get to the escape ship, Brander must make a stand. Him sacrificing himself and providing the necessary distraction to ensure that Riley's able to escape is his last attempt to be the good father to his son that he was never able to be. It's a powerful last standoff for a man that, in his dying moments, was finally able to be there for his son when he needed him most. So rest in peace to Brander Lawson. I thought he was a great one-off character that I thought added a great deal of depth to the story. So now let's go to the flip side of things. The main foe of the show, as we all know, is the Empire. And I think I can confidently say that this is the best depiction of the Empire that we've seen in the animation realm. Now don't get me wrong, it's certainly nowhere near the iconic and well-written version like we see in the original trilogy. It's nowhere near the dark, gritty, fiercely intelligent version like we see in Andor, but for a Filoni project, it's certainly a step in the right direction. There were parts scattered throughout Bad Batch where I thought the Empire was decently portrayed, but overall it was ultimately pretty forgettable. And in Star Wars Rebels, the Empire's depiction was just a giant clown show of a bunch of incompetent idiots. But here with Maul Shadowlord, I think Filoni and a lot of the creatives, more so involved in the animated wing of Lucasfilm, saw the extremely positive fan reception to Andor Season 2 last year, and decided to lean a little bit more in that direction with this project. And that decision certainly paid off. While there's still some elements that I wasn't too fond of, like for example, Lieutenant Blake was just another one of those extremely one-note and over-the-top evil cartoon types of villains, with no nuance whatsoever. He really reminded me a lot of that one Imperial officer from Season 2, Episode 12 of The Bad Batch, who was just 100% snarky and evil, and that's all there was to him. So I didn't like his character at all. Also, the stormtroopers at times do once again feel pretty useless as soldiers, which is a criticism that is often laid against this franchise, as we all know. It isn't as bad as other Star Wars works, because we actually actually do see them take out a handful of some of the minor characters throughout the season, but there are other times where they are just the worthless cannon fodder to fill up the screen. But what this show does right is being able to capture that daunting sense of the Empire's power. Their grip over Janix is tight and absolute. Even characters as powerful as Maul or Jedi Master Daki struggle to break through the blockade that the Empire has surrounded the city with. It takes them half the season just to get out, and that struggle makes the Empire feel strong, like a fist that is tightening its grip all around them. But the most consequential part of the narrative as it relates to the Empire is the three most powerful and important Imperial characters that are in this story are all done pretty well. So let's start with the Inquisitors. When it was shown in the trailers leading up to the show that 2 Inquisitors would be sent in to hunt down Maul and the Jedi, I gotta be honest, I was pretty disappointed. For one, because getting another story dedicated to Inquisitors hunting down Force users was starting to feel like an overused story concept for this era, and that's a criticism that I do still hold, but I'll touch more on that in the second part of the video. But also because the 2 Inquisitors that we saw would be in the show were both pretty lame and underwhelming Inquisitors in the stories that they were both originally from. But wow, do they both get a complete makeover here. Marok and the Crow almost feel like completely different characters in this show. Their on-screen presence feels daunting and captivating. They are shown to be extremely feared by the people around them. They are intelligent and good at snuffing out the information that they need in a timely manner. They are not very complex characters by any means, but I don't think they really need to be. They are the silent but deadly dark side assassins of the Empire. Them being the more stoic evil entities that they are in the show is a type of characterization I greatly prefer for Inquisitor characters. For example, compare the version of an Inquisitor like Reva.
We will find you! We will destroy you!
Compared to this version of Marok.
Tell me everything.
And now you tell me which one you felt more threatened by. Throughout the show, these guys are just straight up aura farming every time they're on screen. Like, if you're gonna make an entrance like this, you better be able to back it up. Because we know what happened the last time the Crow was trying to aura farm, but couldn't back it up. And the good thing is, they actually do. Our Inquisitor characters in the show are actually competent villains. Their lightsaber combat skills get a noticeable boost here when compared to the other works of media that they're in, which is a little odd, don't get me wrong, but I'll discuss that more in detail a little later on. But what it does is it actually makes them feel like a threat. And if the Inquisitors don't feel like a threat every time that they are on screen, like they have the serious potential to do damage to our heroes, then you have failed at the entire premise of the character. And that is something that they have failed to do many times in the past in other shows. But I can confidently say that I think this is the best portrayal of Inquisitors we've ever seen in a show thus far, and I don't think it's even close. Now, besides the Inquisitors being a major positive for the Imperial characters in this show, we can't move on without talking about the big man on campus, Darth fucking Vader. Darth Vader in the show is awesome. There's no other way to put it. It was rumored well in advance before the season even came out that Darth Vader might show up in the show to potentially duel Maul. And while I wasn't too happy that the show seemed to be going in the direction of telling another story focused around the Empire, instead of telling a story that was solely dedicated to that of the Star Wars underworld and Maul's place in it, the idea of a duel between Maul and Vader always intrigued me. There was a scene back in the season 2 finale of Star Wars Rebels where Ahsoka senses that Maul is trying to keep them there on Malachor, and she calls him out on it. And Maul replies with the line, "I cannot defeat Vader alone." Now, although we had never seen Maul fight Vader, the way that line was delivered implied that the two had met sometime in the past. So when the rumors started circulating about the potential duel between these two in the show, my mind immediately jumped to that scene. Is this the moment in time that Maul was alluding to? Is this why Maul believes he cannot defeat Vader without the help of Ahsoka and Kanan? So I was very intrigued just based on that alone. But another thing is there's actually a lot more emotional weight to this fight than you might realize at first glance. Let us remember back to episode 1. During the Duel of the Fates between Darth Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon Jinn, Maul killed Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon was a Jedi Master that Anakin quickly gained an attachment to in that film, and you could already tell was starting to look up to him as a father figure. Qui-Gon was even going to take on Anakin as his new apprentice, but fate had other ideas. When Qui-Gon was killed, he passed down the burden of training the Chosen One to Obi-Wan, who was becoming a great Jedi himself, but admittedly wasn't ready to take on Anakin as his apprentice, especially in the beginning. He did the best that he could, and the two became extremely close over the years, but Obi-Wan was more so like a big brother to Anakin, not a father.
You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you.
And a father figure is what Anakin needed. Anakin was extremely emotionally unstable, and Qui-Gon would have been that deeply wise Jedi Master to help guide him through the tough situation that was his relationship with Padme, to the Chancellor. And let us remember, Qui-Gon was willing to break a couple rules here and there of the stringent Jedi Code if he thought it was for the greater good. He wasn't the most traditional Jedi by any means, and that's why they didn't let him on the Council. The two of them would have been a perfect Master and Padawan pairing. Qui-Gon was the Master that Anakin needed, but didn't get. And if Qui-Gon were still alive, I think there's a strong possibility that Anakin would have never turned to the dark side. So from a certain point of view, if you trace it back to its root, if Maul doesn't kill Qui-Gon, then Anakin might have never become Darth Vader. Now, whether Vader in-universe realizes that in hindsight or not, or whether because of those events he feels extreme anger towards Maul is up for interpretation, but us, the audience, sitting back and seeing everything unfold from a bird's eye view, can certainly make that connection, and thus makes the emotional gravitas more palpable. But taking a look at the details of the final episode, Vader's entrance is great. He emerges from the fog as a dark cloud, killing all the Mandalorians in his path, choking the life out of them. And from there, the lightsaber battle is fantastic. I knew that Maul probably wouldn't have stood a chance against Vader, but seeing Vader take on 3 Force users at once and still manage to maintain the upper hand was a pleasure to watch. I think the fight works so well because it's able to truly capture the feeling of how unstoppable a force of nature Darth Vader really is. It isn't the most flashy fight by any means, but that's not the type of duelist Darth Vader is. I think they did a very good job of nailing his style of fighting. It feels very unique to him. He's like this unstoppable tank moving forward. His swings are obvious, but they are strong and brutal. His defense is unbreakable. His cyborg breathing is like the engine that never quits. The showrunners also blend in some horror elements throughout, which I thought was a nice touch. With the jump scares, the dark lighting, and surrounding smoke. It really adds to the atmosphere and makes it feel incredibly cinematic. And combine all those things with some excellent cinematography, all make for this probably being one of my favorite all-time animated lightsaber sequences. Another key detail that I noticed in the moment, that I saw a lot of others also catch on to immediately after, is Darth Vader doesn't speak. He doesn't say a single word, because he doesn't have to. He's not there for a drawn-out monologue. He's not there to debate with anybody or make small talk during the fight. He is there to finally put an end to Darth Maul, kill the Jedi, and that is it. Selfishly, would I have liked maybe a line or two exchanged between Vader and Maul? Yes, but I'm not going to complain because having him show up there with the sole intention to get down to business feels incredibly realistic to something he'd probably do. It's very in character for him because Vader doesn't even speak that much to begin with. So all in all, he shows up at just the right time, and the best part of all, he doesn't overstay his welcome, to the point where it just feels like the showrunners are trying to milk engagement. Darth Vader was used perfectly for the story that they were trying to tell, and I was very satisfied by the time those credits began to roll. And this all plays into another big positive I have for the show, is that because we've become very invested in the characters, because the villains are shown to be competent, and you get the feeling that nobody is safe, outside of Maul and Vader of course, the show actually feels like it has some stakes. Getting the audience to believe that the villains actually have a genuine chance of winning, whether it be killing our characters or sabotaging our protagonist's goals and interests, creates that necessary tension that makes you yearn to see what happens next. We of course know that Maul survives, but whether or not Maul is able to escape this conflict completely unscathed will have major impacts on the status of the galaxy for the next decade to come. For example, If Devon were to be killed in the escape, and Maul isn't able to take her in under her wing and train her to be his next apprentice, maybe that means that Crimson Dawn never reaches the level of power that it might have otherwise if Maul wasn't able to use Devon as a tool to spread his influence. And in the same vein, if Daki were to make it out alive, I think that likely would have meant that Devon probably wouldn't be turning to the dark side by the season's end like we see. And so Maul wouldn't be able to unleash one of his most powerful tools on the galaxy that he could have used in the pursuit of gaining power and swaths of territory in the galaxy to take control over. So us, the audience, knowing that whoever makes it out of here alive will have major impacts on the major events to come, taking place throughout the galaxy, gives the show that tension that it so heavily leans on, especially towards the latter half of the season. The show is also not afraid to kill off some of our more minor characters as well, to get rid of that sense that everyone, at least somewhat important, has plot armor. Maul didn't have a ton of soldiers left under his command at the season's beginning, but all the ones that he did have left are all gone by the season's conclusion. All the Mauldalorians are killed in combat. Rook gets brutally killed by Vader. The two Knight brothers both get killed. Hell, even Spybot gets chopped in half and falls into a lake of acid. While Maul might be relieved that himself and his new apprentice were able to escape, Maul, now having lost literally everyone that was loyal to him once, will be a massive setback for him. He's now going to have to find a way to claw his way back to the position that he once had. All he has for now is Devon, so I'll be very intrigued to see how that relationship continues to develop in the seasons to come, because at least for the short term, he's going to have a lot of work to do to mold her into the type of apprentice that he can rely on. So those are the really important, more consequential aspects of the show that I enjoyed, but there's a number of smaller things as well which I think are worth mentioning. First off, one of the things that has stirred up a lot of chatter is the animation style of the show and how good it looks. While it is essentially the same style of animation of that of the Clone Wars, the Bad Batch, and Tales miniseries, I think the best way to put it is it's a much more rugged, less clean version of that animation style, to the point where it's certainly noticeable, and that was clearly done purposely. A lot of the brush strokes of the animation don't look as crisp. It's intentionally a little more sloppy to reflect something more like an oil painting, which is inherently a little more loose with its painterly style. There are many establishing shots or wide shots of landscapes throughout the show that pretty much look like a painting that was just taken out of a frame. It's an interesting change that I know a lot of people were happy to see. A lot of people were really starting to get tired of the same old Clone Wars animation style after so many years of that being the standard for Star Wars animation. Now, after seeing a full season of the Maul animation style in action, I do think I still slightly prefer the more standard Clone Wars animation style. It's just gotten to the point in more recent years where it's so crisp and clean. They've essentially perfected it, and it's so pretty to look at. But here with Maul Shadowlord, as a sort of one-off change from the typical style for this show specifically, I didn't mind it, and I can certainly respect the artistry from the animators. Now, while I do prefer that more clean animation look of the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch, one particular aspect of the animation in the show that I really think reached a level that is unparalleled is the lightsaber fights. The lightsaber fights in the show, to put it simply, are just really frickin' good. And that's for a multitude of reasons. For one, the animation quality has gotten to the point where the movements are so incredibly smooth. So smooth, in fact, that it almost felt like at times I was watching something that was shot in 60 FPS, which is the frame rate that is generally used for stuff like video games. So that's a testament to how good it is when you know in actuality it's probably shot at something like 30 FPS. The animation has come a long way from the early Clone Wars days. If you go back and watch some of those early Clone Wars lightsaber duels, the movements are pretty janky by modern standards. Ever since about 2020, since Clone Wars Season 7, is when I think all of that early Clone Wars jankiness was finally gone, and somehow since then, the movements seem to be getting more realistic with each added entry in Star Wars animation. And I think that largely has to do with the animators seeming to be getting better and better at animating the physics within the fight. Now, animating the laws of physics in animation is obviously extremely difficult because, well, animation isn't real. You're not capturing a real thing. You're entirely creating something from your computer and have to artificially insert the laws of physics to the best of your ability. How you think the animated characters would realistically move. Now, sometimes in animation, the physics are purposely embellished or skewed as a creative choice, but the Clone Wars animators have seemingly always tried to animate the physics to as close to reality as they can. I don't know that for certain, but it seems pretty self-evident. Now, Now, if you look at the physics from the early Clone Wars days, and even throughout the Clone Wars in its entirety, the physics definitely seemed pretty off at times, especially during the lightsaber fights. Trying to animate normal people is hard enough, but then when you have to take into account the beings that have force abilities which enhance their movements to superhuman levels, that's another challenging element that's added on top. But over time and with added reps, the animators have certainly gotten better and better at doing it. And here in Maul Shadow Lord, the physics of the fights are extremely realistic. I was very impressed. And for me personally, that hyper-realism just made it that much more of a captivating experience. And the final thing I'll touch on with these lightsaber fights is the cinematography is at its all-time best as well. I think it's noticeably better than other projects. One of the things that I've always kind of nitpicked when it comes to the animated lightsaber duels, and this also can carry over to certain examples in live action as well, is there seems to be at times an over-reliance on close-up shots and very harsh camera movements that sometimes it's hard to tell what the hell is even going on. I've always much preferred when the filmmakers take the camera back and mostly rely on wide shots and medium shots to tell the story of the fight. Particularly wide shots. When there's too many close-ups, it's very hard for the audience to absorb the information of what's happening. But with the wide shot, it is very easy for the audience to tell what is going on, where our characters are at all times. And this is something that Maul Shadow Lord does very well. For comparison's sake, I want to compare some of the Maul Shadow Lord fights to some of the most recent lightsaber fights from other Star Wars animated works. So let's take a look at the Ventress vs Inquisitor fight from Tales of the Underworld last year. This fight, I think, is quite frankly pretty terrible. You see how there's a string of way too many close-ups cutting way too quickly? The camera movements are very drastic. Yeah, not very good. Now compare this to Maul and Devon versus Marok. You see how the camera is pulled back a bit? They're letting the shots linger a little bit longer. It's much easier to tell what's going on. Sure, there's some close-ups spliced in there, but it's not the majority. It's mostly these wide shots and medium shots. Or let's take a look here in the 3v1 vs Darth Vader. Again, you can see how the camera is more pulled back here. It makes for a much better visual experience. We can clearly tell what's going on, who's where, who's coming from where they're striking from. This is way better than this. It's a small cinematography change, but I think it makes a world of difference and really elevates these fights to the upper echelon of lightsaber fights in the whole franchise. The final thing I'll touch on for the positive section of this video is a little bit of a smaller thing, but I did really grow to appreciate it by the show's end, and that's that I really like the world of Janix. World building is one of the most important aspects of Star Wars, but also just for science fiction / fantasy genres in general. There's a reason why George Lucas's Star Wars films were so iconic. It's not just the fact that the stories were so well told and were so interesting, in particular the original trilogy, and it's not just the fact that the characters were so beloved by so many, it is also because George Lucas created the galaxy far, far away. It is the ultimate escapism. There are so many different planets with so many different environments, so many different kinds of species that inhabit the galaxy, so many different cultures, customs, forms of technology that feel so alien to us, so many different factions throughout the galaxy, many different eras of stories within them. Star Wars I would probably consider to be the epitome of world building. So many games, books, comics, theories, and other expanded universe material has spawned from this franchise because the world building is so damn good. The only thing that even comes close in my estimation to the Star Wars level of world building would be that of Tolkien's Middle-earth universe, which also has phenomenal world building in its own right. But even then, I still think Star Wars beats it out. All this goes to say that world building has always been very important to this franchise. It is one of the key aspects of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. And here in Maul Shadow Lord, I thought they did a pretty good job of fleshing out the world of Janix. We effectively spend almost the entirety of Season 1 here on this world, and as such, the show has a great deal of time to explore this planet in detail. We see many different areas of the planet throughout the show. The city streets and subway systems reminded me a great deal of Coruscant blended with New York. The sewer systems reminded me a great deal of the underground tunnels we saw on Mandalore in Clone Wars Season 7. In the forest areas outside the main city reminded me a great deal of Yavin 4. And when you combine all those elements together, it makes for a very unique overall vibe for a planet, which is certainly a welcome addition. There's also many different factions and organizations which are introduced which aren't intricately explored by any means, but do enough to pique my curiosity. The rivalries between Maul's faction, Varyo's group, and Demus's group is something I wish could have gotten a lot more time in the beginning stages of the season. The storyline in the beginning of the show, dedicated to the Janix police and their quest to uncover the mystery of Maul's whereabouts, was something I enjoyed seeing play out far more than I thought I would. In practice, the Janix police functioned in a pretty similar way to that of the Morlana Security Corporation from Andor Season 1. Pretty much just local police that were ultimately under the umbrella of the Empire's authority, but the vibe reminded me much more of something like the Gotham police. Also, this history that's alluded to between Brander and Rena Sewell, the friend who owned the casino, is something that I'd want to learn more about. It's revealed that she used to be a bounty hunter before starting her business here on Janix, so the fact that her and Brander used to be acquaintances intrigues me, considering that Brander's current profession is so oxymoronic to that of Rena's old profession. It begs the question, how did these two become friends? And more importantly, what was Brander involved in before becoming a cop here on Janix? It's little stuff like that that can really flesh out the world and make it all a lot more interesting. And that world building aspect is something that I think Maul Shadowlord does really well. Part 2. The Bad. Alright, now it's time to shift gears. While I certainly had a plethora of things that I liked, in the same vein, there were a plethora of things that I didn't like. So now it's time for the bad stuff. Starting with probably the most underwhelming aspect of the show, and that's Maul. Maul in this show is very much a mixed bag for me in all aspects. It's not that he's bad per se, but it's more so of I just wasn't as invested or intrigued by his character in the show to the degree that I was hoping I would be. And I think that largely comes down to his motivation being pretty unclear and not focused on enough throughout the season. I know he's trying to recruit Devon as a potential apprentice, and all that stuff surrounding him and her is pretty intriguing, as I touched on in the good section of the video, but that's more so the side plot. What's his real motivation here? What's his end goal? What's his plan? He says he wants revenge on all the people that betrayed him, but what exactly does that revenge look like? And what is it all in greater service towards? We see one example of him carrying out revenge of a personal vendetta against the Pike leader who betrayed him off screen, which is fine, but what I more so struggle with is I don't know where Maul's character is going exactly. What is the end goal here? To help illustrate my point here, let's back up a little bit to Darth Maul's time in the Clone Wars. In the Clone Wars, Darth Maul's motivations are abundantly clear throughout. In the beginning, when he first awakens from his madness, the first thing that he remembers was Obi-Wan defeating him and cutting him in half. So initially, his only motivation is killing Obi-Wan, acting like a rabid animal to do so. He starts to flirt with the idea of having underlings to serve him, when he briefly recruits some of Hondo's pirates, but it's really all in service to get revenge against Obi-Wan. After Maul and Savage are defeated by Obi-Wan in Season 5, Episode 1, and barely escape with their lives, Maul has a little bit of time to think. The will of the Force, as he described, brought him in contact with the Death Watch Mandalorians, and upon meeting certain people, his motivations shift. He sees an opportunity here to gain massive amounts of power. The Mandalorians want Maul to help them lead alongside Pre Vizsla to overthrow the Duchess of Mandalore. They will effectively be his personal army. With Death Watch's strength, they're slowly able to force many different gangster groups into submission, including the Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, as well as the Hutt families, all in service of overthrowing the Mandalorian government. When this is accomplished and Maul beheads Pre Vizsla, earning him the Darksaber and the ancient right to rule all of Mandalore, Maul has now laid the foundation for his criminal empire. As he puts it, he will be the head of a new galactic underworld, a force so powerful that could even one day challenge the might of the Republic and the Confederacy. His motivations here are very clear, but then Sidious arrives and fucks him and Savage up. So skip forward to Clone Wars Season 7. After the Mandalorians help Maul escape his imprisonment from Sidious, which is depicted in the Son of Dathomir comic, what are his motivations now? Well, Maul still rules over his criminal network, and seems to still have the allegiance of all the organizations under his wing, but in particular, Maul senses a coming darkness over the galaxy, obviously alluding to the rise of the Galactic Empire. so he thinks that the grand plan of the Sith may be about to fully come to fruition. Because of this, he tells all the Syndicate leaders to go into hiding. He knows that his former master Darth Sidious is at the center of it all, and Maul wants revenge on Sidious. For one, because he wouldn't take him back as his apprentice, and two, because he killed his brother Savage. So Maul is going to do whatever he can now to spoil Sidious's grand plan. He has orchestrated a war here on Mandalore in the hopes that it will lure the Republic in. Considering that he's at the center of it, he's pretty confident that the Republic will send Kenobi to deal with him, but he's also hoping that Anakin will tag along, because by some means he's been able to put two and two together that Anakin Skywalker is now being groomed to be Darth Sidious's future apprentice. So if Maul is able to successfully lure Anakin to Mandalore and kill him in combat, he will deprive Sidious of his precious pupil, and thus could spoil the entirety of the Sith grand plan. Of course we know he's defeated in the end, but that's besides the point. His motivations throughout the Siege of Mandalore arc were once again very clear. So now skip forward back to Maul's Shadow Lord, which takes place about 1 year after Revenge of the Sith. What are Maul's motivations now? I don't really know. It is pretty unclear what exactly he wants. As I said earlier, Maul trying to recruit Devin as an apprentice is more so the secondary motivation, so let's put that on the shelf for now. What does Maul want as it relates to the Criminal Syndicate storyline? What is supposedly supposed to be the main purpose of this show? Well, sometime off-screen between the Siege of Mandalore and Maul Shadow Lord Season 1, all of the syndicates that were loyal to him betrayed him. The Pikes, Crimson Dawn, Varyo's group, and presumably the Black Sun and the Hutts as well, even though they're not specifically mentioned. He says he wants revenge, but what does that look like exactly? How does that revenge play out in practice? Does that mean just killing everybody? Or at least the leaders of all the organizations that betrayed you? We see one example of him doing that with the Pike leader, but is that the plan for everybody? Or does that revenge just simply mean taking back control of all the syndicates that you lost? And if you do get them back, what do you want to do from there? Do you want to use this criminal empire to conquer new territory in the galaxy? Go after specific people? Mount a challenge against the Empire for galactic supremacy, perhaps? Or just use it for personal vanity's sake? All of these questions are just either straight up not answered or left way too vague. I'm struggling to see what the bigger picture is here, because the show doesn't do a good job of presenting it to me. Also, why is Maul and his small remaining force that he has left here on Janix? Maul says in episode 1 that he can now feel the presence of the apprentice that he's been searching for, but it's said in a way that makes it seem like Maul has been here for a while, and Devin now being here has just come about. So why did Maul come to Janix in the first place? Is this the planet that he's initially trying to establish as his home base for rebuilding his criminal network? And if so, why has he chosen this planet? Is this simply a place where he feels like he can lay low for the time being? Was he drawn to this planet because he sees a lot of potential opportunities here for his criminal network to gain power? None of this is really answered at all. All those questions that you might have at the beginning of the show are just put on the shelf when the Empire shows up. And then the focus becomes Maul and the Jedi trying to escape from the Inquisitors and Vader. And by the season's end, when Maul gets a stroke of luck, and just so happens to get saved by Crimson Dawn, you can see where his motivations will probably lie in the future, but that lack of clear motivations for Maul in the beginning of the season was a clear narrative weakness for me. Another small aspect about Maul's character which kinda bugged me, and it's a couple little details but I think they're worth pointing out, is some of the internal character struggle moments that we see play out in episode 8 just didn't land for me. First off, Dave Filoni decided to change some of the details behind Maul's origins. In the Darth Plagueis novel, it tells us that Maul was taken by Sidious as an infant/toddler, around that age. So all Darth Maul knew for the entirety of his upbringing was the ways of the Sith. But here in Maul Shadow Lord, they change it. Maul sees a vision of himself as a child, probably around the age of 10, getting taken away by Sidious, ripped away from his brother Savage. This is such a needless change. Now for those of you saying that it doesn't matter because Darth Plagueis is classified as Legends, due to Disney axing everything that came before, well, I don't give a fuck. Darth Plagueis is one of the greatest, if not the greatest Star Wars novel ever written, and it literally doesn't contradict anything in the canon as far as I'm aware, so there's no reason why it couldn't coexist. But Dave just likes to change shit, whether it's legends from the George Lucas era of Star Wars, or just straight up contradict canon for the sole purpose of telling the stories that he wants to tell. He has no respect for what came before or for the artists creating Star Wars stories in the types of media that he may deem beneath him. And he is the top dog of Star Wars now. He is the literal CEO. No one has the power to check his ego or blasphemous decisions that he makes. Whatever Dave says, goes. So there's probably gonna be a lot more shit like this to come. Also, there's a pretty key line that Maul says when he's looking at the reflection of himself as a kid in the puddle. He says something close to, "I won't let him do this to anyone else," referring to Sidious. And that was an extremely out of character line. Let's be very clear about something. Darth Maul doesn't care about anybody. He never has. At least, not really. Maul would never go out of his way to help anybody if it was a hindrance to himself or his goals. Because ultimately, Maul cares about himself above all else. And he is the way that he is because he was trained in the Sith arts and indoctrinated in the Sith ideology since he was an infant. The Sith only think inwards, only about themselves.
The Sith rely on their passion for their strength. They think inwards, only about themselves.
And this inward-thinking ideology is the epitome of the dark side. So Maul saying that he's going to help people, save people from the wrath of Sidious, makes him sound more like a Jedi than a dark side force wielder. Now, of course, Maul wants to get revenge on Sidious for how he may have treated him in his youth, and the torture that he put him through, but ideally, he'd only care about getting that revenge for himself. He wouldn't care about shielding others from pain. Now, for those of you that may be saying, I can already hear the argument, that's just character development, bro. What? You don't want character development? Well, let's take a step back for a second and really think about this. Every depiction that we've seen of Maul in many different shows and films that take place in the post-Episode 1 part of the timeline, his general mindset or philosophy, you could say, is pretty much the same. In the Clone Wars, which is more towards the beginning of his journey post-Phantom Menace, everything he does in that show are inward goals, only thinking about himself. In his brief appearance in Solo, which is more towards the middle part of his journey at the height of his crime lord days, in that brief amount of time, you can tell that this is the same guy we've always known. Clearly, his goals are still focused on himself and maintaining the power he has amassed. In Star Wars Rebels, towards the end of his journey, he's still focused on his inward goals. He's trying to recruit Ezra to be his apprentice so that he can help him exact revenge on his enemies and regain power. Hell, even in the scene where he dies, when he's laying in Obi-Wan's arms after he strikes him down, Maul asks him if the reason he's come all this way out to this desolate place is to protect the Chosen One. Obi-Wan confirms that he has, and in his dying breath, he says, he will avenge us. Which is implying the fact that, damn, I really wanted to get revenge against Sidious my whole life, but I wasn't able to do it. And I can't now, cause I'm about to die, but he can do it for me. So yeah, his philosophy is the same his entire life. So are you really trying to tell me, knowing all that somewhere in the middle of the timeline for a brief period, he has a philosophical change for a brief stint where he's concerned about protecting Force-sensitive beings from Darth Sidious? No. Sorry, I just don't buy it. And I don't think they're even going to focus on that going forward either, because it seems like the direction of the show from here on out will be focused on Maul climbing the food chain and establishing himself as the leader of Crimson Dawn, while on the side he's training Devin to be his apprentice. Unless there's like a C-plot where Maul goes out trying to deprive Sidious of Force-sensitive children, or infants so that they can't become Inquisitors or Sidious pupils or something, but I find that highly unlikely that will be the case. So I don't know why they included this. It should have been cut. It's certainly a small detail, but it has a lot of negative implications. But let's move on from Maul. Outside of Maul being an overall disappointment for me, there were certainly some other things that bugged me about this show. A big one being the overall premise for the story that they decided to tell. Now, while I do think that the Inquisitor's depiction was an overall positive, and I stand by that wholeheartedly, when it became clear that this was going to turn into yet another story about Inquisitors hunting Jedi/Force users, I was pretty disappointed. It's not that I inherently have anything against that kind of story in the Star Wars universe. In fact, I think it has the potential to be really good when told well. It is the fact that the Inquisitor hunting story has been done so much over the past decade that it's really starting to get stale. In the first 2 seasons of Star Wars Rebels, one of the main through-line conflicts of those seasons was Kanan and Ezra being hunted by the Grand Inquisitor and other Inquisitors. In Jedi Fallen Order, although I thought that game was really good, don't get me wrong, it's about Cal getting hunted by Inquisitors as he's trying to lay the groundwork to rebuild the Jedi Order. In Obi-Wan Kenobi, a show that was an absolute disaster to see unfold, was a bunch of terribly acted and terribly written Inquisitors, and eventually Vader, hunting down Obi-Wan while he's on his mission to save Leia. In Tales of the Empire, half of that miniseries is dedicated to Inquisitors training and Inquisitors hunting down Force users. In Tales of the Underworld, the first episode of the first arc shows Ventress and the new Jedi kid being hunted down by an Inquisitor. I think you're starting to see my point. And keep in mind, that's all taken place in just the past 10 to 12 years or so. Again, it's not that I'm against that kind of story or anything, but I know myself and a lot of us were hoping that the Maul show titled Maul Shadow Lord, i.e. Crime Lord, would be about Maul and his place in the Star Wars underworld throughout the galaxy in the Imperial era, amidst all of the rivaling Star Wars gangster factions and criminal syndicates vying for power. But that's not really what we ended up getting. It kinda was for a brief second, in the beginning of the show. I thought it was pretty interesting seeing the Janix authorities trying to weed Maul and his remaining loyalists out of hiding and take them prisoner. It reminded me a lot actually, and has similarities to the first arc from Andor Season 1. But after a few failed attempts to capture Maul and the gang by the Janix police, and the situation grows bigger than their ability to handle, when the Empire shows up, it then turns into one long escape from the Inquisitors for the rest of the season, which felt pretty similar to other things I've seen from Disney Star Wars many times now. While I did enjoy seeing the Inquisitors, Maul, our Jedi characters, and eventually Vader all interact, I'd be lying if I said it didn't start to feel kind of repetitive in the middle chunk of the show through to the end. To me, it seems like the writers of the show had a very clear idea of how they wanted the show to begin. They also had a clear idea of how they wanted it to end, but they didn't have much of an idea of how they were going to meaningfully connect the beginning to the end. So they ended up just filling it up with a bunch of Inquisitor lightsaber duels. There's a little more nuance to it, of course, but episodes 5 through 9 can best be described in this kind of repeated loop. The Inquisitors are able to muster up information about where our main characters are or might be headed. They are successfully able to hunt them down. The Inquisitors engage our protagonists in lightsaber combat, and our protagonists are just barely able to manage to escape. And repeat. This cycle literally happens like 3 or 4 times in the span of 5 episodes, all just to lead to that inevitable encounter with Vader at the end. Although it might have been fun to see all of the combat unfold in the moment, in retrospect, I wish that they heavily diversified the narrative in that middle chunk of the show. Another massive issue with Maul Shadow Lord, which is probably the most controversial topic about the show now that I think about it, is the power scaling is way off. By power scaling, I mean what the power levels of our characters are, who should be able to beat who, how much of a challenge certain characters present to other characters, that sort of thing. Within the show itself, it's pretty consistent outside of maybe a few examples, but when you take into account other works of Star Wars media, which were literally created by the same people, the issues start to arise very quickly. Now as for Daki and Devin, I don't have any issues with them because this is their introduction as characters. There's no previous work for me to base their power levels on. Season 1 here merely serves as an establishment of their power levels and a basis for me to reference what their power levels should realistically be for future projects or seasons of this show. So let's start with Maul. Maul, I think most would agree, seems to be heavily nerfed in the show, based on what we've seen his power levels to be previously. So let me go through some of his other fights so that we can establish the basis for his power level. In The Phantom Menace, Darth Maul defeats Qui-Gon Jinn, a Jedi Master, but loses to Obi-Wan, who at the time was a Jedi Padawan, but would become one of the Jedi's best in the years to come. In the Clone Wars, in Darth Maul's first fight with Obi-Wan, he wins. Obi-Wan barely escapes with his life. In the second fight, he loses, mostly due to Savage cutting his arm off, but I think we can call it a loss for the two of them nonetheless. nonetheless. The two barely escape with their lives, so essentially he goes 1-1 against Obi-Wan in the Clone Wars, who is one of the strongest Jedi in the galaxy at that point in the timeline. We see him defeat Pre Vizsla, a very skilled Mandalorian warrior, to claim the throne of Mandalore, as well as we briefly see him defeat an unknown Jedi Knight in a Clone Wars intro. In the 2v1 vs Sidious, he loses. However, in the 1v1 part of the duel, he is able to hold his own for longer than most could ever dream of against an opponent like him. Sure, Sidious might not have been going all out in holding some of his power level in reserve, but regardless, if I'm correct, Darth Maul in that fight lasted the third longest that we've seen out of anybody that has ever gone toe-to-toe with Sidious in the films or television, only behind Yoda and Mace Windu. So it's certainly impressive. And finally, against Ahsoka, while he did technically lose, I think he clearly had the upper hand for most of that fight, and the only reason he did lose is because Ahsoka has some of the strongest plot armor in all of Star Wars. For reasons I think we know why. In Star Wars Rebels, probably the most noteworthy fight for this comparison is when he fought off 3 Inquisitors in a fight that was briefly a 3v1, causing them to retreat. He also eventually ended up killing 2 of them later in that episode. So all this goes to say that Maul should be able to defeat most Force users in the galaxy, because during the point we find him in Maul Shadowlord, he is one of the strongest Force users left alive. So when I see Maul in this show struggling to defeat common Inquisitors, it really makes me scratch my head. Why? Maul's power level is way above that of these Inquisitors. Sure, maybe in the case where it's a 2v1 against Maul and Maul has a busted up leg, yeah, okay, maybe then it's more evenly matched. But in the times where it's a 1v1, Maul against an Inquisitor, and it's evenly matched, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because Maul should be able to easily defeat them. Or when it's a 3v2. Maul, a Jedi Master, and Jedi Padawan against 2 Inquisitors, but it's evenly matched? Again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because realistically, that should be a comfortable win for our protagonist. When it comes to Maul vs Vader, I don't think it's as egregious. Maul is kinda able to go toe-to-toe with Vader, but Vader is certainly kicking his ass a little. And that's about what I'd expect, because Vader is more powerful than Maul. I don't think that's that controversial. But Maul not being able to defeat Inquisitors, especially in 1v1 situations, sorry, I just don't buy it. And that neatly brings me along to talking about the Inquisitors themselves, who get the exact opposite treatment of Maul. They get their power levels significantly boosted. The 2 Inquisitors that we see in the show are the First Brother, also known as Marok, and the 11th Brother, who has been dubbed by the community as the Crow. And they were not too effective as combatants in their previous depictions, to say the least. Marok was introduced as an antagonist in Ahsoka, which, as a side note, I think takes place like 28 years after the events of Maul Shadowlord. So they got some explaining to do for how the hell he's even still around in that point of the timeline. But that's besides the point. In the show, Marok dueled against Ahsoka twice, and never seemed like that much of a threat. While he certainly held his own, Ahsoka was able to pretty comfortably defeat him, resulting in his death. And the Crow. Oh my god, the Crow. The Crow was defeated by Ahsoka in 3 seconds. Defeated, mind you, by an Ahsoka that didn't even have a lightsaber. Was it stupid as fuck? Yes. Yes, it was. But as we all know, in the eyes of Dave Filoni, Ahsoka is God, so I'd expect as much. So seeing how effective Marok and the Crow are in this show, especially the Crow, signifies a massive scaling up in their power levels. Now don't get me wrong, I actually much prefer their depiction here in Maul Shadowlord. I want the Inquisitors to be shown as being competent warriors, a daunting on-screen presence that serves as a major challenge for our heroes to overcome. So from that point of view, I didn't actually mind the change. The problem is though, this came second. This came after what we know them from. What we saw them in previously served as the establishment of their power levels as characters. So when we see that it's drastically different in Maul Shadowlord, it makes no sense. If you're looking at it through the lens of, is this a cohesive timeline, where certain things line up, and certain things play out the way they realistically should? No, it does not. It's an absolute clusterfuck. So as much as I liked the lightsaber battles happening on screen, and as much as I prefer these versions of those 2 characters, in the back of my mind, I'm always going to think, oh wait, isn't that the guy that got one-tapped by Ahsoka?
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
But with all that laid out, that just about summarized a lot of the main concerns I had with Maul Shadowlord. There's certainly a number of other smaller things that you can nitpick, but these are the main things that I think really weighed down the show enough where it's not something that I can consider to be great. But with all of those negatives established, I now want to take a brief look ahead, and what this could all mean for the future of the show. As I look ahead towards Season 2, overall, I'm much more optimistic heading into Season 2 than I was heading into Season 1. Even though, as I've discussed thus far, Season 1 was a pretty mixed bag for me, the issues that I think plagued Season 1 are pretty easily fixable, so long as the showrunners take the criticism and apply that for the betterment of the series going forward. I think the tell-all sign for me on whether or not Maul Shadowlord is really going to be something to remember years down the line, or whether it's just going to devolve into more pretty uninteresting Filoni slop that doesn't really do anything new, is whether or not they can actually commit to the supposed premise of this show. Maul Shadowlord, as we all understood it to be going into it, was supposed to be a show about Maul and his time in the Star Wars underworld, between the points of the end of Clone Wars and when he somehow ends up stranded on Malachor in Star Wars Rebels. We got a little distracted with the Empire stuff in Season 1. Sure, it provided some very cool moments, don't get me wrong, but okay, we've had our Empire time, let's move on. Let's get a dedicated show about the Star Wars underworld. I'm not saying that the Empire can't ever show up again. I think that's pretty unlikely considering the fact that they're the Galactic Empire. They're pretty much everywhere. But it shouldn't be the main focus of the show. And the thing that Season 2 has going for it is that the door is pretty much wide open going forward. Season 1 didn't tie us down to anything. All that's left is Maul, Devin, Riley, I guess, and now Crimson Dawn, and that's about it. They can really take the show in any direction that they want. Now is the time to get creative. Dive deep into the scum and villainy of the Star Wars underworld. Bring in new characters, new factions that will present a real and dangerous challenge for Maul and his ascension to the top of the gangster hierarchy. Take us to new parts of the galaxy we've never seen before, away from the presence of the Empire. Let's get away from focusing on the Empire. I don't know if it's that the higher-ups at Lucasfilm don't think that a gangster show would resonate with the Star Wars fanbase, and that's why they're so hesitant to fully commit to that premise. But trust me, the fans want it, and we've been yearning for it for years. Back in the late 2000s, George Lucas began the early development and exploration process of developing a Star Wars underworld show. About 50 to 60 scripts for episodes were completed, and the show was offered to and seriously considered by HBO. The project was ultimately shelved due to the combination of each individual episode reportedly going to cost $40 million, as well as the complete acquisition of Lucasfilm by Disney. But still to this day, a lot of the older Star Wars fans consider that project one of the biggest tragedies that it never got to see the light of day. Skip forward to 2019 with the debut of The Mandalorian. Fans were excited to see Star Wars take on a new direction, as it was pitched to us that The Mandalorian would follow a bounty hunter, going on a variety of missions in the post-Return of the Jedi era. But it quickly turned into not that. The Mandalorian almost immediately fell into the maelstrom of revolving around the grander Star Wars conflict, the war of the rebellion against the Empire, searching for the famous Jedi characters that we all know and love, and most importantly, not really being about bounty hunting in the Star Wars galaxy at all. So it betrayed the premise that we all wanted to see. And most recently with the show literally titled Tales of the Underworld, it could have been a great concept if actual effort and time was put into it. But when it ends up being a mini-series with 6 episodes that are like 10 minutes long, there's only so much you can meaningfully tell in such a short period of time. And begs the question, what's the point? Is this even worth doing? All this goes to say that Maul Shadowlord has the potential going forward to be unique, to really go off in a new direction and explore areas of the Star Wars galaxy that haven't gotten a lot of time dedicated to it on screen. It's now just a matter of whether it wants to commit to being that kind of show, or whether it will devolve into another This Week in the Star Wars Universe kind of a show, constantly revolving around the familiar people, places, and organizations we've already seen time and time again. I really just want this show to feel different, to be more bold and risky with the narrative directions that it decides to go in. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Season 2 is on the horizon. We know it's coming because it was confirmed just shortly before Season 1 started airing episodes. And they said the wait for Season 2 wouldn't be too long, so hopefully that statement was truthful. But until then, all we can do is speculate. So to wrap up this video nicely with a bow on top, all in all, Maul Shadowlord Season 1 is going to get a 6 out of 10 from me. An above average entry in the Star Wars animation realm that I think has a solid enough foundation for the future seasons going forward. But with all that said, that's just about going to wrap up my thoughts for today. For all of you that have managed to make it this far, I thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to me rant about Star Wars. And if you enjoyed it, do me a favor by leaving a like and hitting that subscribe button. These videos take a long time to script out and make, so it helps out the channel a lot, and the support would be greatly appreciated. And finally, as always, now that you guys have listened to my opinions on the show, now is the time to take to the comments and let me know some of yours. What did you guys think of Season 1 for Maul Shadowlord? What do you think worked about it? What did you hate? And maybe the things that you were somewhat mixed about. As always, I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I will see you guys in the next one.